Cold steel pressed against the sovereign's delicate throat. Death was milliseconds away. Any normal bodyguard would beg, bargain, or freeze in absolute terror. Instead, her human protector simply lowered his weapon, threw his head back, and erupted into genuine, booming laughter. You won't believe what this human did next. Soft orchestral music masked the deadly political undercurrents swirling through the grand ballroom of Geneva Orbital. Hanging suspended in the cold void between Earth and the Moon, the space station served as neutral ground for the galaxy's most powerful factions. Tonight, the grand concourse was illuminated by the soft golden glow of thousands of floating luminescent spheres, casting long, dancing shadows across the polished obsidian floor. Queen Cassandra of the Zyran hegemony stood near the massive observation window, her posture rigidly perfect. Her species, though humanoid enough to allow for seamless integration with Terran aesthetics, possessed a tragic fragility hidden beneath their towering, elegant frames. Cassandra's skin shimmered with a faint, iridescent pearlescence, and her large, deep violet eyes scanned the crowd of mingling diplomats, corporate barons, and military generals. She was a monarch on the edge of a knife, attempting to negotiate a trade agreement that would save her starving outer colonies, while acutely aware that half of her own parliament wanted her assassinated for even speaking to humanity. Standing exactly 3 paces behind her, perpetually cloaked in the shadows of the room's grand pillars, was Jonathan Miller. Jonathan was not an imposing figure by galactic standards. He possessed no bioengineered exoplating, no neural-linked targeting optics, and no acid-spitting defense mechanisms. He wore a tailored charcoal gray suit that concealed the standard-issue Terran kinetic armor beneath. His face was rugged, weathered by years of deployment in the Outer Rim, with a faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow. To the alien dignitaries whispering behind their crystal goblets, it was an absolute scandal that a sovereign of Cassandra's stature would entrust her life to a primate from a Class 3 death world. "They are staring again, Jonathan," Cassandra murmured, her voice a melodic hum that translated seamlessly through the station's universal interpreters. She did not turn her head, maintaining her serene smile for the passing ambassador of the Orion Syndicate. "Let them stare, Your Majesty," Jonathan replied, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that barely carried over the string quartet playing in the center of the room. "Staring means they aren't shooting. I prefer staring." Cassandra allowed a faint sigh to escape her lips. "Minister Harlan is approaching. He looks particularly smug this evening. I suspect he has gathered enough votes to challenge the Terran Agricultural Treaty in the next parliamentary cycle." Jonathan's pale blue eyes locked onto the approaching figure. Harlan was a fellow Zyran, draped in the opulent, flowing silks of the conservative faction. His smile was entirely devoid of warmth. Jonathan adjusted his stance, his muscles coiling with subtle tension. He didn't trust Harlan. The man smelled of expensive synthetic wine and cheap political ambition. "The interesting queen," Harlan purred, coming to a halt a respectful distance away, though his eyes darted to Jonathan with undisguised contempt. "A glorious evening for the hegemony, is it not? Though I must confess, I find the atmosphere aboard this human construct to be terribly claustrophobic." "It is a marvel of engineering, Minister," Cassandra countered gracefully, "and the humans have been exceedingly gracious hosts. We would do well to appreciate their hospitality." "Hospitality," Harlan sneered lightly, waving a dismissive hand. "Yes. Though one wonders why a monarch requires a human mercenary trailing her like a stray canid. Surely our own royal guard." "My royal guard," Cassandra interrupted, her tone dropping in temperature, "failed to detect the poison in my rations last month." Jonathan, however, noticed the slight chemical discoloration of the nutrient paste from across the room. "He remains—" Harlan's smile tightened into a grimace. "Of course, Your Majesty. Forgive my insolence. I merely worry for the image of the crown." He offered a shallow bow and backed away, dissolving into the throng of aristocrats. Jonathan kept his eyes on Harlan until the minister disappeared behind a cluster of diplomats. "He knows something," Jonathan muttered. "Harlan always knows something," Cassandra replied softly. "The question is whether he orchestrated it." The gala continued, a dizzying display of wealth and feigned peace. Jonathan maintained his vigil, running constant risk assessments. He tracked the trajectories of the serving drones, analyzed the structural integrity of the heavy chandeliers, and noted the exact locations of the 6 emergency bulkheads. Humanity had not yet mastered the sheer energy output of Zyran plasma shields, nor the telepathic resonance of the Alpha Centaurians, but they excelled at one particular art: paranoia. Jonathan's mind was a supercomputer of worst-case scenarios, calculating the geometry of death in a room designed for celebration. As the evening wore on, the ambient lighting began to dim, signaling the transition into the formal banquet phase of the summit. Cassandra turned away from the observation window, smoothing the front of her crystalline gown. "I believe it is time we take our seats, Jonathan. The Prime Minister is preparing to speak." "Stay close," Jonathan instructed, falling into step right behind her left shoulder. They moved toward the grand dining hall, navigating the sea of alien nobility. The air grew thick with the scent of 100 different alien cuisines and heavy perfumes. Jonathan's hand casually brushed against the inside of his jacket, feeling the reassuring weight of his custom-built sidearm. It was a completely archaic weapon, by galactic standards firing solid, depleted uranium slugs, rather than superheated plasma, but Jonathan preferred it. Plasma dissipated against energy shields. Heavy metal moving at 3,000 feet per second cared very little for elegant technology. Just as they reached the massive, arched entryway of the dining hall, the station underwent a microscopic shudder. It was so subtle that most of the alien guests, engrossed in their conversations, didn't even pause. But Jonathan felt it through the soles of his boots. A deep, resonant vibration that didn't match the steady, rhythmic hum of the station's life support systems. It was a gravitational anomaly. Someone, somewhere, had just activated a localized mass-dampening field. "Stop!" Jonathan commanded, his voice sharp enough to make Cassandra halt immediately. "Jonathan? What is—" Before she could finish the sentence, every light in the grand concourse shattered simultaneously. Total darkness instantly consumed the ballroom, followed a fraction of a second later by the panicked screams of 100 different species. The orchestral music ground to a chaotic halt. The sudden plunge into the void was not merely a loss of illumination, it was a tactical blindfold. Jonathan didn't need to think. Muscle memory and years of brutal training took over instantly. He grabbed Cassandra's arm, his grip firm but careful not to bruise her fragile physiology, and yanked her backward into the deep recess of the grand archway, putting solid durasteel plating to her back. "Shields up! Silence your breathing!" Jonathan hissed into her ear, his other hand already drawing the heavy ballistic pistol from his shoulder holster. "The emergency backups aren't engaging," Cassandra whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "The station's AI should have rebooted the grid within milliseconds." "It's a localized EMP tailored to standard galactic frequencies." "It blinded the grid," Jonathan said, reaching up to his temple to activate his tactical implant. Unlike the elegant neural-linked interfaces of the alien elite, human combat implants were crude, invasive, and highly shielded against electromagnetic interference. A sharp burning sensation flared behind Jonathan's eyes as his artificial optics booted up. The pitch-black ballroom suddenly rendered into a high-contrast wireframe of thermal signatures. He saw the panicked crowd surging toward the main exits, a chaotic mass of glowing bodies. But his enhanced vision immediately locked onto anomalies. 4 figures were moving completely counter to the crowd. They were cold. Absolute zero. They wore thermal dampening suits, rendering them completely invisible to standard security scans. And they were moving with terrifying synchronized precision directly toward the spot Cassandra had occupied 3 seconds ago. "Assassins," Jonathan confirmed. 4 of them. "Coming our way." "Who sent them?" she asked, her breathing shallow. "Doesn't matter right now," Jonathan replied, shifting his stance, placing his body entirely between the Queen and the approaching threat. The assassins moved like liquid shadow. They bypassed the screaming diplomats without touching a single one, their movements eerily silent. Leading the pack was a figure wielding a long, curved blade that emitted no energy signature whatsoever. It was Gareth Cole. Jonathan didn't know the man's name yet, but he recognized the technique, the fluid, arrogant stalk of a high-end corporate wetwork specialist. Gareth was human, or at least he used to be. Heavily augmented, biologically enhanced to serve as the ultimate killer for the highest bidder. He had likely been hired by Minister Harlan specifically because he knew how to bypass human-designed security protocols. Gareth reached the area where Cassandra had been standing. Through his thermal optics, Jonathan watched the assassin pause, head tilting as he realized his target was gone. Gareth raised a hand, signaling his 3 subordinates to fan out. "Stay here. Do not move," Jonathan whispered to Cassandra. Before the assassins could fully triangulate her position, Jonathan stepped out of the alcove. He didn't bother issuing a warning. He raised his heavy pistol and squeezed the trigger twice. The deafening crack-crack of the ballistic weapon echoed like a cannon in the confined, panicked space. The heavy, depleted uranium slugs tore through the air. The first assassin to Gareth's left didn't even have time to register the sound before the rounds punched straight through his thermal dampening armor, shattering his chest cavity and sending him flying backward into a table of crystal glassware. The remaining 3 instantly locked onto the muzzle flash. "Contact!" one of the assassins barked, a synthetic, modulated voice. Gareth didn't flinch. He darted forward with terrifying speed, closing the distance between himself and Jonathan in a blur of motion. The 2 subordinate assassins flanked, pulling advanced pulse pistols from their hips. Jonathan dropped to one knee as twin beams of superheated blue plasma scorched the air where his head had just been, singeing his hair and turning the Durasteel archway behind him white-hot. He rolled to his right, firing blindly to suppress the flankers. His third shot caught one of them in the knee, the heavy slug amputating the alien limb in a geyser of blue fluid. The creature wailed and collapsed. But Gareth was already upon him. The assassin swung the long, curved blade. Jonathan brought his pistol up to block, a standard close-quarters deflection maneuver. But as the blade struck the reinforced barrel of Jonathan's gun, it didn't just clash, it sliced cleanly through the metal as if it were soft butter, severing the barrel and rendering the firearm completely useless. Monomolecular edge. Jonathan's brain registered instantly. A shield breaker. Jonathan threw the useless grip of the gun at Gareth's face and dodged backward, barely avoiding a horizontal slash that would have disemboweled him. The edge of the blade caught the heavy kinetic fabric of his suit, slicing a clean line across his chest and drawing a sharp line of heat and pain. "You're outclassed, guard dog," Gareth whispered, his voice smooth, chillingly calm amid the chaos of the screaming ballroom. He stepped into the light of a distant, flickering emergency beacon. Gareth's face was pale, his eyes entirely black, devoid of sclera, a side effect of aggressive neurological overclocking. "You're making a mess of my suit, pal," Jonathan grunted, dropping into a defensive martial arts stance, his fists raised. It was a ridiculously primitive posture against a man wielding a physics-defying sword, but Jonathan had no other option. Gareth chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "A human defending a Zyran monarch. The galaxy really has lost its sense of order. Step aside, Miller. You don't have the biology for this." "How do you know my name?" Jonathan asked, shifting his weight, watching Gareth's footwork. "I studied your file," Gareth said, circling slowly. "Jonathan Miller, former orbital dropshock trooper. Honorable discharge after the Sirius campaign. You're tough, you're loyal, but you are flesh and bone. I have carbon fiber interlacing in my muscle tissue and a neural processor that sees your movements before you even make them. Die with dignity or die screaming. Your choice." "I pick option 3, Jonathan snapped, lunging forward. He threw a feint with his left, a textbook jab to draw the blade, before dropping low to sweep Gareth's legs. But Gareth was impossibly fast. The assassin didn't even block the jab. He simply pivoted, letting Jonathan's momentum carry him forward, and brought the pommel of his sword crashing down into the back of Jonathan's neck. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. White-hot agony exploded in Jonathan's skull. His vision strobed, his equilibrium shattered, and he crashed face-first onto the obsidian floor. His ears rang, a high-pitched whine drowning out the ambient panic of the room. He tried to push himself up, but his left arm refused to respond. The strike had traumatized his central nervous system. Gareth stepped over him casually, not even bothering to finish him off. To an augmented killer, a broken human was no longer a variable in the equation. "Cassandra," Gareth called out softly into the darkness. I know you're in the alcove. Come out. If you make me come in there, I will start dissecting your guard dog piece by piece. Jonathan forced his head up, tasting copper in his mouth. He watched, blurry-eyed, as Queen Cassandra, terrified but maintaining her regal dignity, stepped out from the shadows of the archway. She held her chin high, her iridescent skin glowing faintly in the dim emergency lighting that was finally beginning to flicker to life. Leave him, Cassandra demanded, her voice remarkably steady. Your contract is with me. Indeed it is, Your Highness, Gareth smiled. In a single, fluid motion, Gareth crossed the remaining distance, grabbed Cassandra by the shoulder, spun her around, and pressed the edge of the monomolecular blade directly against her throat. Cold Nile pressed against the sovereign's delicate throat. The monomolecular edge, so sharp it could sever atoms, hovered less than a millimeter from Cassandra's carotid equivalent. A single twitch from Gareth would end a 3,000-year dynasty and plunge the Xeran hegemony into total civil war. Death was milliseconds away. Jonathan was on his hands and knees, blood dripping from his nose onto the pristine floor. His left arm hung uselessly at his side. His chest burned where the blade had grazed him, and his head throbbed with a concussive tempo. He was beaten. He was physically outmatched, outgunned, and outmaneuvered by a superior predator. Gareth looked down at the broken human struggling to breathe. The remaining wounded assassin limped over, keeping his weapon trained on the crowd, securing the perimeter. Minister Harlan's plan had worked flawlessly. Look at him, Your Majesty, Gareth whispered into Cassandra's ear, his black eyes fixed on Jonathan. This is what you placed your faith in. A creature of mud and arrogance. Humanity likes to boast about their resilience, their indomitable spirit. But at the end of the day, physics wins. Biology wins. He is weak, and because of his weakness, you die tonight. Any normal bodyguard would beg. They would try to bargain. They would offer themselves in exchange, or they would freeze in absolute terror, paralyzed by their own failure. Instead, Jonathan Miller stopped struggling. He sat back on his heels. He looked up at Gareth, his face covered in blood, his breathing ragged. And then Jonathan lowered his right hand, rested it on his knee, threw his head back, and erupted into genuine, booming laughter. It wasn't a chuckle. It wasn't a desperate, hysterical giggle. It was a deep, rumbling belly laugh that echoed off the high-vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. It was the sound of a man watching a brilliant comedy, a sound so utterly out of place in a hostage situation that it caused the remaining panicked diplomats to freeze in confusion. Gareth's confident smile faltered. His brow furrowed. The assassin tightened his grip on the queen, the blade pressing just enough to draw a single drop of iridescent blue blood from her neck. What is so funny, ape? Gareth snapped, his synthetic calm fracturing slightly. Jonathan coughed, spitting a glob of blood onto the polished floor before wiping his mouth with the back of his good hand. He looked at Gareth with eyes that held absolutely no fear, only profound, mocking pity. I'm sorry, Jonathan wheezed, shaking his head, a grin still plastered across his battered face. I'm really sorry. It's just... I read your file too, Gareth Cole. Or should I say, Subject 8-9, Alpha. Gareth's eye twitched. Shut up. You spent your whole life upgrading yourself, Jonathan continued, his voice regaining its gravelly strength, ignoring the command. Carbon fiber muscles, neural processors, subdermal plating. You made yourself the perfect machine. You forgot what it means to be human. I evolved, Gareth hissed. You stayed a primate. Yeah, maybe. Jonathan laughed softly, slowly pushing himself up to his feet. He swayed slightly, but his right leg anchored him. But because you rely on all that expensive tech, you forgot the most basic rule of human combat. And what is that? Never bring a knife to a dead man's switch, Jonathan grinned. Gareth's dark eyes narrowed. Bluff. Your weapon is destroyed. You have no explosives on your person. My optical scanners would have picked up any detonator. You're right, Jonathan said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. No explosives, no detonators. But you see, Gareth, when my government assigned me to protect the Queen, They didn't just give me a gun and a nice suit. They knew Zyran politics. They knew someone like Harlan would eventually hire a ghost like you. They knew that if an assassin got past the perimeter, they'd use localized dampening fields, EMPs, and shield breakers to bypass alien tech. Jonathan took another step forward. Gareth pressed the blade harder against Cassandra's neck. "Take one more step, Miller, and I take her head." "Do it," Jonathan said, his voice dropping all humor, turning into ice. Cassandra gasped, her wide violet eyes staring at Jonathan in betrayal and horror. Gareth hesitated, his hyper-fast brain trying to calculate the human's angle. Why was he sacrificing his principle? "I said do it!" Jonathan roared, the sheer volume making the wounded assassin flinch. "Cut her throat, Gareth! Let's see what happens!" Gareth didn't move. His neural processor was feeding him risk assessments, and every alarm in his cybernetic brain was flashing red. The human's heart rate wasn't spiking with panic. It was steadying. "You're confused," Jonathan smiled, a feral, bloody baring of teeth. "Let me explain it to you. You brought a monomolecular blade, a weapon designed to slice through atoms, generating zero friction, zero heat. It's elegant, but it's an alien design. Zyran, actually, designed to bypass energy shields. But you forgot something about this station. Geneva Orbital is a Terran construct. It runs on a human AI called Archangel." Gareth's eyes darted upward to the ceiling, then back to Jonathan. "Archangel is blind. The EMP knocked out the internal sensors." "The EMP knocked out the standard optical and thermal sensors," Jonathan corrected, taking another step, putting himself barely 3 feet away from the blade. "But Archangel is a paranoid human AI. It has a tertiary analog backup system, a chemical sniffer integrated directly into the life support vents. It doesn't look for weapons, it looks for biological signatures." Gareth's jaw clenched. "Meaningless." "Is it?" Jonathan chuckled. "When you sliced my chest open, you didn't just cut fabric, you drew human blood. When you hit me in the head, I bled on the floor. Right now, there are approximately 4 ounces of my O-negative blood oxidizing in the ambient air. And I have a very specific genetically engineered enzyme flowing through my veins, courtesy of the Terran military." Gareth's eyes widened slightly as the realization finally hit him. "Yeah," Jonathan nodded, seeing the assassin's face change. "It's a biological tag. The moment Archangel detects that specific enzyme aerosolizing in the air, it flags a code black. It realizes a Terran VIP Guardian has been critically wounded. And it doesn't need cameras to know exactly where I am. It triangulates the chemical emission." "Kill him!" Gareth screamed to his surviving subordinate, but it was too late. From the ceiling above, the emergency lights didn't just flicker on, they shifted to a harsh, blinding crimson red. A mechanized, deafening voice echoed through the entire concourse. "Code Black Protocol activated. Lethal force authorized. Targeting locked." "You think you're fast, Gareth?" Jonathan whispered, staring directly into the assassin's black eyes. "Let's see you outrun an automated CIWS point defense turret." The ceiling panels directly above Gareth and Cassandra ripped open. 2 twin-barreled rotary cannons, usually reserved for shooting down incoming micrometeors outside the station, dropped from the internal housing. Gareth realized instantly that if he tried to slice Cassandra's throat, the microsecond his arm moved, the automated turrets would vaporize him. The machine didn't feel pressure, it only calculated trajectories. But Gareth was holding the queen. The turrets wouldn't fire if there was a risk of hitting the hostage. That was standard protocol. "Stalemate!" Gareth snarled, keeping the blade perfectly still. "They can't shoot me without hitting her." "You really didn't read my whole file, did you?" Jonathan sighed. "I didn't program Archangel to protect the Queen. I programmed it to protect me." Jonathan didn't hesitate. Ignoring the pain in his shattered nervous system, he lunged directly into the razor-sharp edge of Gareth's blade. Gareth panicked. As Jonathan's body slammed against his arm, the assassin instinctively yanked the blade backward to maintain leverage, pulling it away from Cassandra's throat to defend himself. In that fraction of a millisecond, the physical connection between the assassin and the hostage was broken. Cassandra was clear. The roar of the automated rotary cannons was deafening, a localized thunderstorm of depleted uranium firing at 4,000 rounds per minute. Jonathan hit the obsidian floor a fraction of a second before the airspace above him turned into a river of superheated kinetic destruction. Deafening thunder swallowed the grand ballroom whole. The automated Lockheed Martin Aegis 7 CIWS turrets did not fire lasers or plasma. They fired solid, heavy mass, specifically designed to shred incoming asteroid fragments. Against a biological target, even one as heavily armored and cybernetically enhanced as Gareth Cole, the results were instantaneous and absolute. Gareth's advanced neural processor, capable of calculating 1 million combat variables a second, barely had time to register that his hostage leverage was gone. He was vaporized in a hail of depleted uranium. The kinetic force was so immense that it didn't just neutralize the threat. It cratered the reinforced durasteel floor beneath where the assassin had been standing, sending shards of obsidian flying like shrapnel. The remaining subordinate assassin, witnessing the total annihilation of his squad leader, dropped his advanced pulse pistol and fell to his knees, raising his hands in immediate surrender. The CIWS turrets whirred, their targeting lasers painting a red grid over the surviving killer, but they held their fire. The threat to the biological VIP was contained. Silence slammed back into the room, broken only by the mechanical hiss of the retractable turrets cooling down and the terrified sobbing of the alien dignitaries huddled beneath their tables. Jonathan! Cassandra's voice was the first sound to cut through the ringing in his ears. She dropped to her knees beside him, uncaring that the pristine, iridescent fabric of her gown was soaking up the dark red pool spreading beneath him. Jonathan groaned, rolling onto his back. The left side of his body felt like it was plugged into a live electrical socket, and his vision was swimming with dark spots. He had thrown himself directly into the path of the monomolecular blade to force Gareth's hand away, and the assassin's reflexive jerk had carved a deep, clean crescent into Jonathan's shoulder armor, biting deep into the muscle. "I'm all right, Your Majesty," Jonathan rasped, coughing violently. "Just need a minute to let the painkillers kick in." His tactical suit's internal biomonitors were already flooding his system with synthetic adrenaline and coagulants, but the sheer physical trauma of the fight was catching up to him. "You absolute fool," Cassandra whispered, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of terror and overwhelming relief. Her trembling fingers hovered over his wounded shoulder, afraid to touch the jagged laceration. "You threw yourself onto a shield breaker. Worked, didn't it?" Jonathan offered a weak, lopsided grin, his teeth stained pink. He flinched. Humans are crazy, but augmented cyborgs are practical. He prioritized his own balance over your throat for exactly 1/10 of a second. That was all Archangel needed. "Secure the perimeter! Take that hostile into custody!" Reynolds barked, pointing a gauntleted hand at the kneeling assassin. 2 Marines hauled the alien up, binding his limbs with magnetic restraints. The medics swarmed Jonathan, instantly deploying a portable stasis field around his upper torso to stabilize the massive blood loss and prevent nerve degradation from the monomolecular cut. As the medics worked, the station's main power grid finally rebooted. The golden luminescent spheres flickered back to life, casting harsh light on the carnage. The Grand Ballroom, once a masterpiece of interstellar diplomacy, looked like a war zone. From the crowd of shell-shocked diplomats, Minister Harlan emerged. His flowing silk robes were slightly rumpled, but his face was perfectly composed, twisted into a mask of exaggerated horror and concern. "My queen!" Harlan cried out, rushing forward, flanked by 2 of his own personal Zyran guards. "By the stars! The humans have allowed this atrocity! I warned you about their primitive security measures. Are you harmed?" Cassandra stood up slowly, her regal composure returning instantly. She looked down at Harlan, her expression unreadable. "I am unharmed, Minister, thanks entirely to my human guard." Harlan's eyes flicked to Jonathan, who was currently being hoisted onto an anti-grav stretcher by the Terran medics. A brief, almost imperceptible flash of deep frustration crossed Harlan's elegant features. A tragic failure of their vaunted technology, nonetheless. To think, hired killers bypassing the station's sensors. We must leave this death trap immediately, Your Majesty. I will summon the Royal Dreadnought. Hold on a second, Harlan, Jonathan said, his voice surprisingly loud, cutting through the murmurs of the room. He pushed a medic's hand away and forced himself to sit upright on the hovering stretcher. Mr. Miller, you need to lie down, the lead medic urged. But Jonathan waved him off, his pale blue eyes locking onto the Zyran minister. How did you know they bypassed the sensors, Harlan? Jonathan asked, his voice dripping with venom. Harlan blinked, offering a patronizing smile. It is obvious, is it not? They entered undetected in the dark. No, Jonathan said, tapping the side of his own head. The EMP knocked out the lights and the grid. But they were wearing thermal dampening suits, a very specific modification designed to bypass Zyran internal biometric scanners, not Terran ones, which means whoever hired them gave them the wrong architectural schematics for this station. I am a politician, not a security expert, human, Harlan scoffed, turning back to Cassandra. Your Majesty, surely you will not allow this mercenary to speak to a minister of the hegemony in such a tone. Let him speak, Cassandra commanded, her voice dropping the temperature of the room by 10 degrees. Jonathan leaned forward, fighting through a wave of nausea. You see, Harlan, humans are paranoid. But we are also obsessive data hoarders. When the hegemony agreed to this summit, my government didn't just run background checks. They utilized a legacy algorithmic intelligence framework originally designed by Palantir Technologies back on Earth to track every single encrypted financial transaction moving through the Orion Syndicate's dark markets over the last 6 months. Harlan's patronizing smile began to freeze. Financial transactions? What does this have to do with an assassination attempt? Everything, Jonathan said, a feral grin returning to his bloodied face. Gareth Cole didn't work for cheap, Jonathan continued, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the grand concourse. The alien diplomats had stopped murmuring. Every eye in the room was fixed on the bleeding human on the stretcher. An augmented killer of his caliber costs millions of standard galactic credits, Jonathan explained, wiping a fresh streak of blood from his chin. And you can't just transfer that kind of money without leaving a digital footprint. Not when human financial networks are involved. Harlan drew himself up to his full, towering height, his iridescent skin flushing a darker shade of violet. Are you accusing me, a minister of the High Council, of funding this strike? This is an outrage. I have diplomatic immunity, and I demand this primate be arrested for slander. You're right about the immunity, Commander Reynolds stepped forward, his heavy power armor whirring as he crossed his arms. Terran authorities can't touch you for crimes committed under hegemony jurisdiction. But you're wrong about the slander. Jonathan tapped a command onto the holographic interface strapped to his good wrist. Instantly, a massive, three-dimensional ledger projected into the air above the grand dining table, completely ignoring the ruined crystal and spilled wine. We humans have a long history of corporate warfare, Jonathan said softly. Long before we joined the galactic stage, we perfected the art of the financial paper trail. The money used to hire Gareth Cole was routed through 14 different shell corporations in the Cygnus sector. A brilliant obfuscation by Zyran standards. But your accountants made one fatal error. Harlan stared at the glowing blue numbers, his hands beginning to tremble slightly. They routed the final payment through a banking subsidiary owned by J.P. Morgan Stark, Jonathan said, pronouncing the ancient Terran corporate name with absolute reverence. You used a human bank to pay a human assassin to kill a monarch on a human space station. Do you have any idea how insulted our intelligence agencies were when they found out? Cassandra looked at the projected data, her sharp mind instantly translating the financial routing codes. She saw the seal of Harlan's private estate, buried deep beneath layers of proxy signatures, directly tied to the final escrow account that had paid the assassins. We knew about the hit 3 days ago, Jonathan revealed, leaning back on the stretcher, exhaustion finally taking its toll on his voice. You knew? Cassandra turned to Jonathan, her eyes wide with shock. And you said nothing? If we arrested them before they struck, Harlan would have claimed it was a Terran fabrication to destabilize your government, Jonathan explained, looking directly at the Queen. He would have used the arrest to rally the conservative faction, declare war on humanity, and usurp your throne anyway. We needed him to commit. We needed him to spring the trap. Harlan took a step backward, his eyes darting frantically toward the exits. But Commander Reynolds and his Goliath-clad Marines had already sealed every doorway. You used me as bait, Cassandra realized, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a profound, terrifying awe at the sheer audacity of the human strategy. With all due respect, Your Majesty, I am your bodyguard, Jonathan said, his pale eyes softening as he looked at her. My job is to protect your life, but my government's job is to protect your reign. The agricultural treaty you want to sign with us? It guarantees food for billions of your people. We couldn't let a parasite like Harlan stop that. So we let him play his hand. And we made sure I was standing exactly where I needed to be when the knife came out. Harlan spun toward his two personal Zyran guards. Shoot them! Shoot the humans! We are leaving! The Zyran guards did not move. They looked at the projected financial data, which clearly displayed Harlan committing high treason against the crown, and then looked at Queen Cassandra. Cassandra straightened her posture, the full, crushing weight of her royal authority radiating from her fragile frame. Minister Harlan, she spoke, her voice ringing like a crystal bell in the silent hall. By the laws of the First Dynasty, you are stripped of your titles, your lands, and your immunity. Guards, place this traitor in irons. Harlan's own guards stepped forward, violently seizing his arms and forcing him to his knees on the obsidian floor. The arrogant minister sputtered, screaming curses in the ancient Zyran tongue, but the sound was quickly muffled as a stasis gag was applied to his jaw. Take him to the Terran brig, Cassandra ordered. He will await trial by the High Council. As Harlan was dragged away in absolute disgrace, the tension in the room finally broke. The remaining diplomats erupted into chaotic chatter, instantly recalibrating their political alliances now that the conservative faction had been decapitated in a single devastating stroke of human cunning. Cassandra ignored them all. She walked slowly over to Jonathan's anti-grav stretcher. The human medics had finished applying the surgical stasis foam to his shoulder, leaving him looking pale, battered, but remarkably alive. She reached out, her long, elegant fingers gently brushing against the uninjured side of his face. The ambient golden light of the ballroom caught the faint trace of tears in her violet eyes. You laughed, Cassandra whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the medical equipment, when he held that blade to my throat, when all seemed lost. You looked a cybernetic monster in the eye and laughed. Jonathan managed a weak chuckle, wincing as the movement pulled at his ribs. I told you, Your Majesty, I prefer it when they stare. But when they try to kill you... Well, I had to let Gareth know he was the punchline of a joke he didn't even know he was part of. You humans, Cassandra said, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. You do not fight like normal creatures. You weaponize your own blood. You weaponize your economy. You turn your very mortality into a trap. Class. 3 Death World, remember? Jonathan smiled, his eyelids beginning to droop as the heavy combat sedatives finally took hold. We don't have plasma shields or telepathy. We just have grit, spite, and really, really good accountants. Cassandra signaled the medics to move the stretcher toward the station's trauma bay. She walked beside him, her hand resting protectively on the edge of the hovering gurney. Rest now, Jonathan Miller, the queen of the Zyran hegemony, commanded softly. When you wake, you will find your contract has been permanently extended. And I believe I owe your government a very favorable signature on a certain agricultural treaty. Jonathan didn't answer. He had already drifted into a deep chemical sleep, completely secure in the knowledge that he had done his job. Above them, the grand concourse of Geneva Orbital slowly returned to order. The automated cleaning drones hummed as they scrubbed the shattered glass and blood from the floor. But the galaxy would never be the same. The alien elite had witnessed firsthand the terrifying reality of human protection. They had learned that humanity did not merely defend their allies with brute force and kinetic weapons. They defended them with a ruthless, calculated, and terrifyingly precise machinery of survival. And if an assassin ever dared to put a blade to the throat of a human's charge, they would find out exactly why the entire galaxy was slowly learning to fear the quiet, fragile-looking primates from Earth. If you enjoyed this thrilling deep dive into the raw, uncompromising resilience of humanity against the galaxy's worst, hit that like button and share the story with your fellow sci-fi fans. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY tales, intense galactic dramas, and twists you won't see coming. Your support keeps the stories flowing. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Jonathan's shoes? Stay strong, stay human, and see you next time.